In the dark corners of a world broken by war and fear, there existed a creature that no one dared to speak of. Her name was whispered in the darkest alleys, and her legend spread like wildfire across the lands. The people called her the Monster. They feared her because of her terrifying appearance, her towering figure, sharp claws, and glowing red eyes that seemed to pierce through the darkness. The city was once a peaceful place, full of life and laughter. But then something changed. It was as if the skies themselves had darkened and a curse had fallen upon the land. The monster appeared seemingly out of nowhere. Some believed she was sent by the gods to punish them. Others thought she was an evil spirit born from the earth's deepest shadows. She lived alone far from the city's people in the ruins of an ancient temple. Every now and then a terrible roar would echo from the temple's broken walls, shaking the earth beneath the feet of the villagers. They said it was her voice, a sound so chilling that it would freeze the bravest of hearts. No one dared to venture near the ruins for fear of becoming her next victim. The soldiers of the city had tried to fight her, but each time they sent a group to eliminate her, they never returned. The monster was too powerful, too cunning. With her immense strength and terrifying abilities, she defeated them all without even breaking a sweat. The city's leaders, desperate to protect their people, had long ago abandoned any hope of stopping her. They put up walls, raised shields, and lived in constant fear of the creature that stalked the darkness. But among all this fear and chaos, there was one man who refused to believe the stories. His name was Elias, a young soldier who had just returned from the front lines of battle. He had seen countless horrors, beasts, soldiers, and enemies of every kind, but none like her. The monster was different. There was something about her, something that stirred curiosity in his heart rather than fear. Elias had heard the stories, the whispers that echoed through every tavern, and the warnings given to every child. Stay inside when the sun sets. Don't wander too far. The monster is out there. These words were burned into his mind, but Elias didn't believe them. He had always been the kind of person who questioned what he was told, and deep down, he couldn't shake the feeling that there was more to the creature than the city's fearful tales. One evening, as the sun dipped below the horizon, Elias found himself standing at the edge of the city, looking towards the ruins of the old temple. The air was thick with the smell of wet earth, and the distant howls of wolves echoed through the trees. He stood still for a moment, letting the cool breeze rush past him. His mind was set. He would see for himself. He had to. With a deep breath, he began his journey toward the ruins. His boots crunched on the dry leaves as he made his way through the darkened woods, the moonlight barely breaking through the thick canopy of trees. His hand gripped the hilt of his sword tightly. Though his heart raced with excitement, he remained calm. He had fought many battles, faced monsters that others would have fled from without a second thought. But this was different. This was a creature from the shadows of legend. As Elias approached the temple, the air grew colder. The ground beneath his feet seemed to vibrate with an unknown energy, as if the very earth was alive with anticipation. He paused at the entrance of the ruins, where the crumbling stone walls loomed high above him like a haunted fortress. The sound of rustling leaves filled the air, but there was no sign of the creature, no roar, no terrifying scream, just silence. Elias took a step forward, his eyes scanning the surroundings. The temple was eerily quiet. It was as if the world itself was holding its breath. His instincts told him to turn back, but his curiosity pushed him forward. He needed to know the truth. Was she really a monster, or was she something more? Something misunderstood? Suddenly he heard it, a faint sound like a low growl coming from the shadows inside the ruins. Elias's heart skipped a beat. He wasn't alone. He quickly drew his sword, its cold steel gleaming in the moonlight. His eyes darted around the dark temple, searching for the source of the noise. Every muscle in his body tensed, ready to strike. And then from the darkness a figure emerged, tall and imposing with glowing red eyes that seemed to burn like fire. The monster stood before him, her massive form shrouded in shadows. Her long, sharp claws scraped against the stone floor as she moved, her body covered in dark scales that shimmered in the faint light. Elias stood frozen, his sword still in hand. He had expected fear to take over, to feel his heart race with terror, but instead he felt nothing. He didn't feel fear. He didn't feel hate. He only felt curious. He could see the sadness in her eyes, the loneliness that seemed to radiate from her every move. The monster was not a creature of pure evil. She was not the terror that the people had painted her to be, and in that moment Elias knew one thing for sure. He had to find out more. The truth was not in the stories. The truth was in her. The world had feared her, but Elias saw something beyond the monster. He saw a creature lost, cursed and alone, and he was determined to help her find her way out of the darkness. The night was still, and the air hung heavy with an eerie silence. Elias stood motionless, sword in hand, staring into the eyes of the creature before him. For the first time in his life, he wasn't sure what to do. The monster, the creature of legend, the terror of the land, wasn't acting like he'd been told. There was no roar, no vicious strike. Instead, she stood there, her eyes locked onto his with a strange intensity. Her massive form, cloaked in shadows, seemed less like a threat and more like a shadow of sorrow. There was something deep in her gaze, a quiet sadness that Elias couldn't ignore. It confused him, and for the first time he found himself questioning everything he had been told about her. Her claws, which should have looked deadly, now appeared delicate in the moonlight. Her scales, dark as night, shimmered faintly, reflecting the soft glow from the cracked walls of the temple. The creature was not the monster he had heard of. She wasn't some vicious beast out to destroy everything in her path. No, this monster looked lost, alone. For a long moment, neither of them moved. The only sound was the soft rustling of the wind outside the temple, as if the world itself was waiting for one of them to make the first move. Elias's breath caught in his throat. Are you real?" he whispered, his voice betraying his confusion. The creature tilted her head slightly, her glowing eyes narrowing. For a second, Elias thought he had made a mistake, that perhaps he was imagining things. But then, to his astonishment, the creature spoke. Her voice was low and gravelly, but there was a softness to it that surprised him. "I am real," she said, her words resonating in the quiet air. "But I am not what they say I am." Elias was taken aback. This wasn't the fearsome roar he expected. There was something in her voice that made him want to listen, to understand. "What are you?" he asked, lowering his sword slightly, though still keeping it close. He felt no need to defend himself, not against someone who spoke like this. The creature's eyes glinted with an emotion Elias hadn't anticipated: regret. "I was once like them," she said, her voice trembling, with the weight of a painful truth. "Once I was like you. A human." She paused as if the words themselves pained her. "But I was cursed, changed." Elias's grip on his sword tightened again. His mind raced as he tried to understand what she was saying. A human? How could that be possible? The story said she had never been human, that she was something born of pure evil. "Cursed?" Elias asked, his voice barely a whisper. "What do you mean?" The creature stepped forward, her massive frame shifting in the dim light. Her eyes locked onto his with a deep, intense stare, as if searching his very soul. "The curse," she said slowly, "was placed upon me when I was a child, a long time ago. I was innocent then, just a girl. But they saw me as a threat, and they turned me into this." She motioned to her towering body, her claws, and her glowing eyes. "A monster." Elias blinked, the weight of her words sinking into his mind. The monster wasn't born evil. She wasn't a creature of destruction by nature. She was the victim of a cruel curse. This revelation hit him harder than any blow from a weapon. His heart ached for her, and his mind began to turn, trying to understand the deeper story behind her eyes. "Why didn't you fight back?" Elias asked, his voice softening as he lowered his sword even further. He felt a strange pull to her, Need to protect her, to make her story known. She sighed, a long, heavy breath that seemed to carry centuries of pain. I did try, she said. I fought them with everything I had. But in the end, I learned something about myself. I was not like them. The people who cursed me, they were afraid of what I could become. So they bound me to this form, to this monster. Her words echoed in Elias's mind. Afraid. They had feared what she could become, so they cursed her, twisted her into something terrifying. His heart broke for her. She had never been a monster, just a being, cursed and misunderstood. Then I am sorry, Elias said quietly, his voice filled with sympathy. He stepped closer, his heart pounding in his chest. You've been living in fear all this time, haven't you? The creature nodded, her expression darkening. I have lived alone for as long as I can remember. And the world will never understand what I truly am. They see a monster, and they fear me. They all fear me. Elias's heart swelled with compassion. This wasn't just a creature. It was a victim of the world's ignorance and hatred. He could see it now, more clearly than ever before. The monster wasn't the thing to fear. The fear itself was the real enemy. He took another step toward her, his sword now fully lowered. I don't fear you, he said, his voice firm with sincerity. I see you. I see beyond what they have made you. For a brief moment, the creature's eyes softened, as if hearing those words for the first time in her life. She stared at him in silence, and Elias realized that his words, simple as they were, had meant something to her. You are not alone anymore, he said, his voice full of hope. I will help you. We'll find a way to lift this curse, together. The creature's eyes glowed with a mixture of wonder and disbelief. No one had ever spoken to her like this before. No one had ever dared. And as Elias stepped forward, reaching out to her, he knew that this was only the beginning. There was a long road ahead, one filled with danger and fear from those who still saw her as a monster. But together, perhaps they could change the world's perception, and hers too. Her glowing red eyes met his once more, and for the first time, she saw a glimmer of hope in her own reflection. The road to freedom might be long, but she wasn't alone anymore, and that was all that mattered. The moon hung high in the sky, casting pale silver light through the cracks in the temple ruins. The air was thick with the tension of the unknown. Elias stood facing the creature, his sword now lying forgotten on the cold stone floor beside him. For the first time since he'd met her, he felt a deep sense of understanding, as if something inside him had clicked into place. This wasn't just a chance encounter. It was fate, or perhaps something deeper. He wasn't sure what to call it, but he knew one thing. He had to learn more. The creature, the monster, as the world called her, was no longer just a legend, a fearsome being to be destroyed. She was someone who had been forced into a nightmare, cursed by powers she never asked for. Now, standing in front of her, Elias felt a pull to uncover the truth about her, to strip away the layers of fear and misunderstanding that had been built up over so many years. What else? What else have they told you about me? She asked, her voice quieter than before. It was still rough, but there was a vulnerability there now, a hidden pain that made Elias want to reach out and ease it. They say you're a monster, a force of destruction, Elias replied, his voice steady but filled with the realization that everything he had been told was wrong. But I don't think that's true. The creature's eyes flickered, and for a second Elias thought he saw a flash of hope in them, an emotion she had probably buried long ago. I used to be human, she said softly. Before the curse, I was like you. Elias's breath caught. He had heard the legends, everyone had, but hearing it from her, hearing it so plainly, shattered everything he thought he knew. A human? He stared at her, trying to reconcile the terrifying figure before him with the image of a human being. What happened? He asked, his voice barely above a whisper. The question burned in his chest, but he didn't know how to ask it without sounding foolish, as if he were still afraid of what he might hear. The creature shifted uncomfortably, her claws scraping against the stone. "It was a long time ago. I was a child living in a small village," she began, her voice distant as if she were reliving the memories. "I was just like everyone else. I played with other children. I laughed. I felt joy, but I had something special inside me, a gift, I suppose, something that the people didn't understand." Elias leaned in slightly, hanging on her every word. She was opening up to him, something that no one had ever done before. His mind raced with questions, but he stayed quiet, waiting for her to continue. "One day," she continued, "a group of travelers came to the village. They were different, dressed in fine robes, speaking in strange tongues. They saw me, saw my eyes. They said I had the power of the stars, that I was chosen for something greater than the life I was living. At first I didn't understand, but then they told me they could unlock my potential. They offered me the chance to become more. The temple's once quiet walls now seemed to hum with a new energy." Elias had seen many things in his life: war, destruction, loss, but nothing had ever moved him like the creature standing before him. She was a living testament to everything humanity feared, yet he saw only a soul bound by a curse. They sat together in the heart of the ruins, surrounded by the remnants of a world long forgotten. The moonlight filtered through the broken roof, casting soft shadows across the stone floor. The monster, now revealed to be something more, a cursed human, was not the terrifying beast the world had made her out to be. She was lost, fragile, and haunted by the very thing that had given her power. Elias knew the world would never accept her. There was too much hatred, too much fear. People didn't like what they couldn't understand, and the monster was the embodiment of everything they feared. For the first time, Elias began to feel the weight of his actions. He had promised to help her, to find a way to break her curse. But the world was a harsh place, and the moment he took her side, he knew that the city would turn on him. They wouldn't listen. They would never see what he saw. "We can't stay here," Elias said quietly, his eyes fixed on the creature. "I don't know how long we can hide. If the soldiers come looking for you, they won't stop until you're dead." The monster, or rather, the woman who had once been human, looked at him with a mix of sadness and fear. "I know. They will come for me. They always do." Her voice trembled as she spoke, and Elias could see the raw pain in her eyes. She had lived with the curse for so long, hiding from the world, never knowing if the next day would bring another hunt. The thought of being hunted, of being the prey in a world that saw her as nothing more than a monster, made Elias's blood boil with anger. "They can't do this to you," he said, his voice low but fierce. "You're not a monster. You're a victim of their lies, of their fear. I won't let them hurt you." She shook her head, the scales on her face reflecting the dim light. "You don't understand. They won't stop. I'm nothing but a weapon to them, a creature they can use to control others. And when I refuse to obey, they will destroy me." Elias clenched his fists. "But I'm not going to let them. I'll fight for you. I'll stand by your side no matter what." The monster looked at him, her expression one of disbelief. "Why? Why would you do that for me? I'm nothing but a cursed being. The world hates me. No one has ever looked at me the way you do." Elias leaned forward, his eyes unwavering. "Because I see the person you are beneath all this. I see the girl who was hurt, the person who deserves a chance at life. I won't let you be defined by this curse. I won't let the world strip away your humanity." For a long moment they sat in silence, the weight of their situation settling in. They both knew the dangers they faced. The world would never see her as anything but a monster. But Elias's heart told him otherwise. He couldn't abandon her now. He couldn't turn his back on someone who needed him more than anyone ever had. Suddenly the quiet was shattered by the distant sound of footsteps, soft at first but growing louder. Elias's heart skipped a beat. Someone was coming. "Get up," he whispered urgently. "We have to move. Now." The monster stood, her massive form towering over him as she looked toward the entrance of the temple. The fear in her eyes was palpable, but so was the resolve. She had been hiding for so long, running from those who wanted to kill her, but now for the first time she had someone who was willing to stand with her. "Where will we go?" she asked, her voice shaking. Elias scanned the ruins around them. "We'll figure it out, but we can't stay here." He reached out, taking her hand, and for a moment the world around them seemed to fade. All that mattered was the bond they shared now, the promise he had made to help her, to show her that there was still kindness in a world that had turned its back on her. The footsteps grew louder, and Elias knew that time was running out. But they had no choice. They couldn't stay hidden forever. "We'll go south," he said quickly. "There's a village hidden deep in the mountains. It's isolated. No one will find us there." The creature nodded, a flicker of hope flashing in her eyes. "Do you really think they'll leave us alone?" Elias hesitated, then nodded. "I don't know, but I'll make them." With that, they moved quickly through the temple's crumbling corridors, the sound of their footsteps echoing in the vast silence. As they exited the ruins and stepped into the cold night, Elias felt the weight of their journey ahead. There was no going back now. They were on the run, hunted by the very world that had condemned her. But as long as they were together, Elias knew they had a chance to defy the fear that had bound her for so long. And maybe, just maybe, they could find a place where the world didn't see her as a monster, but as a person, someone worthy of a second chance. The world might fear her, but Elias didn't. And that, he believed, was enough to change everything. The moon hung like a pale guardian over the land, casting its light on the narrow path that Elias and the creature now followed. The night was cold, and the wind whispered through the trees, as though the world itself was trying to warn them. Every step they took felt like a step further into the unknown, a world where they were both outcasts, running from the forces that sought to destroy them. Elias walked at the front, his sword still strapped to his side. But now there was no fear in his heart. There was only a quiet resolve, a determination to protect the creature, to keep her safe from those who would never see her as anything but a monster. As they moved deeper into the wilderness, the weight of their choices grew heavier with every passing hour. Behind him, the creature, once feared, now a victim, moved silently, her massive form almost ghost-like in the moonlight. Her once terrifying presence was now tinged with something softer, something human. She wasn't just a curse. She was a person, a soul whose fate had been cruelly twisted by those too blinded by fear to see the truth. "Elias." Her voice broke through the silence, a soft whisper carried on the wind. He turned, meeting her gaze. Her eyes, which had once glowed with an unholy red, were now softer, almost human, though still carrying the weight of centuries of pain. "What is it?" he asked, his voice steady, though he could hear the concern in her tone. She hesitated, taking a step closer, as if unsure of how to voice the question that had been weighing on her. "Do you think we can really escape this?" she asked, her voice barely a whisper. "Do you think there's a place where they won't come for me? A place where I can finally be free?" Elias felt his heart tighten at her words. She was asking for something he couldn't promise, not yet, but he wouldn't let her feel hopeless, not now. He had made a promise and he intended to keep it. "We'll find it," he said firmly. "I don't know how, but we'll find a place where you can live without fear, a place where they can't reach you." The creature nodded slowly, though doubt still lingered in her eyes. "But will the world ever stop seeing me as a monster? No matter where we go, I'll always be hunted." Elias clenched his jaw, the reality of their situation sinking deeper into his bones. The world had painted her as a monster, and the fear that gripped people's hearts would not let go easily. It was a fear he had been raised with, a fear that had shaped his every decision. But now, seeing her as she truly was, the girl, the human, trapped in a monstrous body, he could no longer stand by and let that fear dictate his actions. They will, Elias said with certainty, though his words felt heavier than he intended. I'll make them. The creature looked at him with an unreadable expression as if trying to understand the depth of his words. How? She asked, the single word heavy with the weight of all the uncertainty they faced. Elias stopped in his tracks, turning to face her fully. He could see the vulnerability in her eyes, the fear of never finding acceptance, never finding a place where she could simply exist. But Elias knew that he couldn't back down now. If he was going to stand by her, if he was going to help her, he had to make the hardest choice of his life. I don't know how, he admitted, his voice raw, but I'll stand against them. I'll stand against anyone who tries to hurt you, and I'll make sure they see the truth. You're not a monster. You're just you. The words hung in the air between them, a fragile promise in a world that had never known kindness. The creature gazed at him for a long moment, and then, to his surprise, she stepped closer, placing her hand, still large and clawed, but now softer than before, on his shoulder. You would do that? She asked, her voice filled with disbelief. You would risk everything to protect me? Elias nodded without hesitation, his gaze unwavering. I've already made my choice, he said, and I won't back down. You're not alone anymore. Not while I'm here. For a moment, they simply stood in the quiet of the night, the sound of the wind rustling through the trees the only thing that broke the silence. The weight of Elias's words sank into both of them, into him, who had made a promise he wasn't sure he could keep, and into her who had spent so long hiding from the world, never daring to believe that someone might truly see her for what she was. You don't have to carry this burden alone, Elias continued. I'll help you carry it every step of the way. The creature's eyes softened, and for the first time Elias saw a flicker of hope there, a hope that had been buried deep inside her for so long. Thank you, she whispered, the words barely audible. Thank you for seeing me. Elias smiled, his heart swelling with determination. We'll find that place, I promise, and no matter what it takes, I'll be there. We'll fight for your freedom. But as the night stretched on and the path ahead grew darker, Elias knew that the real fight was only just beginning. They had made the choice to fight, to stand against a world that had condemned her. But the journey ahead would not be easy. The soldiers would come. The world would turn against them. And no matter how hard they fought, there would always be the lingering fear that they would never find a place where they could truly be free. But Elias had made his choice. And for the first time, he could see the creature not as a monster but as a person who deserved to live, to be free, and to find peace. Together, they would face whatever came next, and whatever it took, they would win. The wind howled through the trees, biting at their skin as Elias and the creature made their way through the forest. They had been traveling for days now, and every step seemed to carry them deeper into a world that neither of them truly belonged to. It felt as if the very earth was conspiring to pull them apart, the cold and the shadows threatening to swallow them whole. Yet despite it all, Elias had never been more certain of anything in his life. They were close. Close to the village Elias had promised would offer them sanctuary. Close to a chance at something better, a life where the creature could find peace, where she could finally escape the horrors that had chased her for so long. But there was no escaping the past. No matter how far they ran, the world would not forget the monster. It would never forget what they had done to her, and it would never stop hunting her. Elias felt the weight of that truth bearing down on him with each passing moment. As much as he had hoped that the world would let her go, he knew better. They had already hunted her once, they would come again, and this time, Elias wasn't sure they would be able to outrun them. The sound of footsteps broke through his thoughts. Not just any footsteps. These were heavy, purposeful, and the unmistakable clank of armor echoed through the trees. Elias's heart skipped a beat. They were too close. Get behind me, he whispered urgently, turning to face the creature. Don't make a sound. We need to hide. The creature nodded, her expression tense, though her eyes betrayed the fear that still lingered inside her. She stepped back into the shadows, blending into the darkness like a specter. Elias reached for his sword, knowing that this moment was inevitable, that it was only a matter of time before the city's soldiers caught up with them. They had been running for weeks, but the city had never given up its pursuit. It was only a matter of time before the wrath of the world descended upon them. The soldiers emerged from the trees, their armor gleaming under the moonlight, their faces obscured by helmets. At their head was a familiar figure, a commander Elias had fought alongside many times, a man who had once been his brother in arms. But that was before he had become one of them, before he had joined the hunt. "Elias," the commander called, out, his voice cold, void of the camaraderie they had once shared. "You've made a grave mistake. You've broken the law. And now, you must pay the price." Elias stood tall, sword drawn, his heart heavy but resolute. "I won't let you hurt her," he said, his voice steady despite the rising panic inside him. The commander's eyes narrowed as he looked past Elias, catching sight of the creature standing in the shadows. "There she is," he said with a sneer pointing toward her. "The monster. Do you truly believe she deserves your protection, Elias? Do you think she's worth fighting for?" Elias clenched his jaw, trying to keep the fury in check. "She's not a monster. She's a person. She's been cursed, manipulated by forces you can't even begin to understand. And I will not let you harm her anymore," the commander scoffed. "You're blinded by your own foolishness. She is a weapon, a danger to all of us. You can't see it, but the rest of the world does. She is nothing but a curse, and curses like her must be destroyed." "No," Elias said, his voice rising with a quiet intensity. "You don't get to decide who deserves to live. You don't get to decide who's a monster based on fear and lies." The soldiers shifted uneasily, their weapons ready, but Elias could see the doubt creeping into their eyes. They were soldiers, trained to obey orders without question. But Elias wasn't just a soldier anymore. He was something different now. He was her protector. The creature stepped forward, her glowing eyes locking onto the commander's. "You don't know me," she said, her voice quiet but full of conviction. "You don't know the pain I've endured, the curse I carry. I didn't ask for this. But I am not what you think I am. I never was." The commander faltered, his grip on his sword tightening. For a moment, Elias could see the hesitation in his eyes, the doubt that had been planted there by her words. But it didn't last. The commander's eyes hardened again and he raised his sword high. "It's too late for words," he said, his voice cold. "The order is clear. She must die." The air seemed to freeze, and in that moment, everything slowed. Elias could feel the tension thickening, the weight of the choices that had led them to this moment. His heart pounded in his chest, but he knew what he had to do. He had made his choice, and no matter the cost, he would stand by her. The creature's eyes met his, and for the first time, Elias saw something more than fear in them. There was trust. There was a promise between them, unspoken but powerful. "I won't let them take you," Elias said, his voice fierce. With a single, decisive motion, he lunged toward the commander, his sword slicing through the air. The soldiers moved quickly, but they were no match for the fury that burned inside Elias. He fought with everything he had, not for himself, but for her, for the woman who had been trapped in a nightmare for so long, a nightmare that the world refused to understand. The battle was swift, and Elias felt the weight of every swing. The soldiers were skilled, but Elias was relentless. He fought not just for survival, but for redemption, for the chance to show the world that the monster wasn't the real threat. Fear was. As the last soldier fell, the commander's eyes locked onto Elias with a mixture of rage and disbelief. "You're a traitor, Elias," he spat, his voice filled with venom. "You've thrown away everything for a monster." Elias stood tall, panting, his sword bloodied but steady. "I've thrown nothing away," he said, his voice strong. "I've finally found what's worth fighting for." The commander sneered, but there was nothing more he could do. He retreated with the remaining soldiers, leaving Elias and the creature alone in the clearing. The wind, once cold and biting, now felt different, a little warmer, a little more forgiving. Elias turned to the creature, his heart racing from the battle and the weight of what he had just done. But in her eyes he saw nothing but gratitude, no longer a monster but a person, a soul who had found someone who would stand beside her, no matter the cost. And though the world might never understand their choice, Elias knew one thing for sure: this was just the beginning. The road ahead was uncertain, but together they would face whatever came next. And for the first time, Elias believed they had a chance, not just for survival but for redemption. The forest was still, the only sounds the occasional rustle of leaves as a gentle breeze moved through the trees. The air was crisp, but there was a sense of peace settling over Elias and the creature, a rare stillness after the chaos of the past few days. Their journey had brought them to the edge of a new world, one they had yet to understand, but one that offered the possibility of a future where they could exist, together, without fear. They stood at the entrance of a small village, nestled at the foot of the mountains. The villagers here were isolated from the rest of the world, far enough removed from the city and its rules to be untouched by the hatred and fear that had chased the creature for so long. The village was quiet, peaceful, the perfect place to begin anew. But Elias knew that peace was fleeting. They couldn't stay here forever. The world wouldn't let them. The same people who had once hunted the creature would come looking for them again, seeking to destroy what they didn't understand. "What if they find us here?" the creature asked, her voice soft, but filled with the weight of their reality. She stood beside him, her once monstrous form now blending more seamlessly into the shadows of the forest. Though her appearance still drew fearful glances, Elias knew that the real change was internal. In her eyes there was something different, a glimmer of hope, a belief that maybe, just maybe, there was a place for her in this world. "They will," Elias said, his voice low but steady. "But not today. Not right now." The creature looked at him, uncertainty still lingering in her gaze. "How long will we have?" she asked, the question hanging in the air between them, unanswered. Elias took a deep breath, his eyes scanning the horizon. In the distance the sun was just beginning to set, the orange and pink hues painting the sky with the promise of a new day. "As long as we can," he said, his voice filled with determination. "We'll make this time count. We'll find a way to change things." He turned to her, meeting her gaze with a sense of quiet resolve. "We don't need the world to understand us. We don't need them to love us. We just need to live." The creature stepped closer, her massive form somehow gentle in the moonlight, as if she were trying to absorb the quiet beauty of the moment. "I've spent so many years hiding, Elias. So many years running. I don't know if I can stop being afraid. I don't know how to live like you do, without fear." Elias reached out, placing a hand on her shoulder. He could feel the weight of the curse still pressing on her, the burden of a lifetime spent hiding from the world. But beneath that weight he could also feel something else. Strength. The strength of someone who had survived against all odds. "You'll learn," he said softly. "It's not about being fearless. It's about finding the courage to keep going, even when the world tells you to stop." She met his gaze, her eyes wide, as if seeing him for the first time. "Do you really believe that?" she asked, her voice barely above a whisper. "I do," he said, his voice steady. "And I believe in you, I always have." There was a long pause, and for a moment it felt as though time itself had stopped. The weight of their past, the pain, the fear, the darkness that had followed them, all seemed to fade into the distance. They were no longer fugitives, no longer defined by what the world thought of them. They were just two souls, standing together at the edge of something new. The creature's expression softened, the shadows of her past no longer as sharp in her eyes. "Thank you," she whispered, "for seeing me, for helping me see myself." Elias smiled, his heart swelling with a quiet pride. "You were never a monster," he said. You were always just you. The village stretched out before them, a simple, peaceful life waiting to be claimed. It wasn't perfect. It wasn't a cure for everything they had endured. But it was a chance to find peace, a chance to rebuild. "We'll stay here for as long as we can," Elias said, his voice filled with the certainty of someone who had finally found his place. "We'll start over, and maybe one day the world will see the truth. But even if they don't, we'll still be free." The creature nodded, a faint smile tugging at the corners of her mouth, a smile that spoke of something deeper, something she had long forgotten. "I think I can live with that," she said softly. And as they walked toward the village, the last vestiges of the night fading behind them, Elias felt a sense of peace that he hadn't known was possible. They were no longer running, no longer hiding. The road ahead was uncertain, but for the first time in a long while, they weren't afraid. Together, they had chosen a different path, a path of redemption, of understanding, of hope. And as the sun rose over the village, they took their first steps into a new beginning.